All right. Welcome back, guys. So next we're going to have Todd Lunderburg, he started out as a consultant at Accenture, and then he actually pitched and successfully got a $400,000 loan, which he used to launch his mobile canning business. That's now works with breweries all across the region, and is even expanding into wine and I believe even cold brew and so forth. Yep, so he's extremely inspirational. He's actually walking the walk, and he's going to share with you all the information he learned from working at the top consulting firm in the world, and then also running his own business. So, welcome, Todd. Make sure you pin that so everyone can hear you.
All right. Nice. Well, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the intro, Carl. I started a mobile canning company about 2 years ago. I can beer for local craft breweries, just like this. I can this as a canned wine. As Carl said, I pitched my idea to a bank about 2.5 years ago. It was a loan for only $300,000 though, so pretty close. But for Accenture, what I did for one of the most relevant projects is I helped create a governance structure for a company that wanted to spend about $50 million. So they had a very rare scenario where they had $50 million to spend, and they needed to come up with the best approach for spending their money. So we went in there, we were a team of 3 people, and we came up with a governance structure. We created a committee of about 12 people from high-level stakeholders across the organization. And then we created what I'm going to go into and have an activity for is a project intake form. So anybody within the organization was required to submit this form. This group reviewed it, looking for key pieces of information that I'm going to go through in detail here. And then at that point, if they got the thumbs up, they'd move on to the more detailed presentation. That more detailed presentation is what I think is very similar to what you're going to do for the pitch deck at the end of this program. So with that said, I'm going to go through a little bit of what I do for mobile canning, and then I'm going to jump into some examples of what I did for a project with Accenture. So for my mobile canning, I go to breweries across Long Island, New York City, Connecticut, some in Massachusetts. I was up in Vermont once. But you can think of me as like a landscaper. I have canning equipment in the back of my trailer. I pull it with a truck. I show up to the craft breweries. So I'm in Chelsea Brewery, I'm in Kelso, I'm in Rockaway, I'm in Big Alice. I did Finback once, and then a bunch out in Long Island. And what it was, in my mind, was a way to spread the cost of this equipment, because it was $300,000, $400,000 worth of equipment. I could spread that cost through 20 different breweries, so one brewery didn't have to pay for this expensive equipment themselves. Since they only use it sometimes just one time a month, some use it one time a week, I was able to kind of spread that cost. So that was my business model. So I'm going to go through this project intake form shortly, but I'm really viewing every project, every idea through the lens of, it kind of sounds bad, but how much money are you going to make and how much is it going to cost? And really, it comes down to that, right? I know some projects are more, not necessarily driven by making money, which is fine, but you still have to make enough money to survive. So the number one thing I've learned in owning my own business for the past a couple years is cash flow is the most important. So you can have a brilliant idea, but if you're not going to see a check from somebody for a year or two, you're going to have to come up with a plan to pay your bills for a year or two. So really mapping out up front, how much do you expect to sell? How much is it going to cost to get up and running? And when are you going to see your first paycheck? Because if those fundamentals don't map out or they don't work, it's going to be really hard to get off the ground. So when I think about creating a pitch deck, I think about summarizing just a few key things. And listening to Mike's presentation, I think it follows pretty well. So you've got your idea, you've got your personas. I view it mostly as, what's your main persona? How are you going to really make money off this? As Mike was saying, you might find one of those outlier personas to be more interesting, or you might connect to them more personally, but if you're not making money off of your project, it's going to be very hard to sustain yourself. So for this project at Accenture, I created this project intake form, which is really just describing your business. What are the key benefits? What are the key costs? When are you going to start? When are you going to first see cash flow? What are some dependencies, any risks? Who are your competitors? Who are your personas? And that's really about it. You pitch that idea and you get the nod of move forward or maybe revise your thinking. So what I want to try to do is take what Mike was working on, show you this project intake form. I actually brought in my business plan as an example, so you can see what I used to get funding for about $300,000 as an example of what you could use for your final pitch deck. Because 2 months seems like a long way away, but that's going to come really fast. So I would recommend working on this pitch deck in tandem with what Mike has you working on, because 2 months is going to fly by. So with that said, any questions before I start? I want to go through the project intake form. It's going to be about a 10-minute activity after I walk through each of the fields. And then I want to have everyone, I guess, depending on the time, one group present, and then maybe pair off and have each other present to save time. But I want to really collect these at the end if everyone's comfortable, and provide feedback. So. Let me pull this up. Has anyone seen the show Shark Tank? Yep. So it's it's very entertaining, but they cut straight to the point, right? So what I realized in my experience working with some of these big companies is simple is better. Like, you should be able to create this project intake form, within, if you do it in detail, within a day, but I want to have everyone do it in, a matter of 10 minutes. But it shouldn't take that long. So this is an example of what we had about 25 to 30 different project managers submit. Each project was valued at roughly over $1 million. So we set the threshold. Any project that goes through this global financial company over $1 million has to submit one of these. It goes to the review committee of 10 to 12 people, and then they decide whether or not they want to see this project go to the next phase. If it goes to the next phase, they assign a project manager and they assign resources to build it out. So description of product or service, very, very brief here. Mike's presentation before me was going into a lot of detail about personas. That's all the information that we assume people do, but we don't need to see it on this intake form. We assume you've done your due diligence, you've done your research. But this is the 2 or 3 key points so I can pick it up and understand what your business is and what the key benefits are and key benefits and costs, right? So when I view a project and I see, it could be just like an empty real estate, empty property. It's like, what is the best business for that property? You come up with an idea. What's the total investment required? How much money could you potentially make? How long is it going to take to repay that investment? So if you think about developing an app, right, you could just ballpark it at, say, maybe like a $50,000 to develop a nice prototype for something, right? It doesn't have to be exact numbers, but how long is it going to take you to pay off that initial investment and then any additional investments? We got the proposed start date. So when do you think you're actually going to go live? I view that as, if you're starting now and you don't think you're going to be selling a product or service for 2 years from now, it's going to raise a flag in my mind of what are you going to do for income for the next 1 to 2 years? Does that mean you have to get a part-time job? Right? So what I found myself in thinking through trying to leave Accenture and start my own business is, how do I come up with a plan to pay the bills while I build a business? My answer to that was canning beer. So this was not my original end goal. My original end goal was to do more of like consulting work for consumer goods, for breweries, for these soda companies, the wineries. This was a way for me to pay the bills. So I quickly realized, like, cash flow for that, I was just hoping that this product or service would take off. Well, I needed to come up with a plan that would get a paycheck immediately, and this was really the solution. And now I find myself just living my temporary solution, and I just pivoted. So it worked out pretty well, but that proposed start date and first day of cash flow, in my mind, are extremely important things to think about. Constraints and dependencies. I mean, this is going to change depending on the project. I pick on your project because you had a cool visual, but like, do you have a patent, or are there certain constraints? Do you need to get approval by somebody? If you're in consumer goods, do you have FDA approval? Do you have a liquor license to sell the beer? Things like that. What are those constraints and dependencies? Keep it short, never more than 3 or 5 things, and then you build out your presentation will have all that detailed information. But this should be the one-pager to summarize what it is. I find it pretty helpful as I think through ideas to just summarize it in something like this. And this, you can add or subtract anything as needed. Key team resources, very important if you're within a company, right? Because you're going to be tying up a lot of resources. Or if you're relying on somebody because they have one specific skill set, list that out here. The key features of your product or service, customer demographics, which sounds like you've been spending a lot of time on. And then competitor analysis. It's who's doing something similar. So I want to see it. I want to see what they're doing, and I want to see what their next phase is going to look like. Because if you find out you're chasing something that already exists, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Right? When I started my mobile canning company, there was already a mobile canning company. There was already multiple. But it didn't stop me. I just came up with a different approach, which my approach was full service. So I provide all the materials, the cans, the pack tech, putting it into 4-pack, 6-pack, all the cardboard trays, where my competitor required the breweries to reach out to the vendors and have them delivered separately. So I was like a one-stop, which was my angle into this. So doing the competitor analysis was pretty important. I'm happy to show some slides. I'm not going to go into the details of my business plan. I'm happy to show if you're interested, but there's just a couple slides I want to call out. So with that said, this is one of the 2 steps that we used for this company and to divide up $50 million. So it was first the project intake form to give us the thumbs up, thumbs down, and then it was start working on the detailed presentation, the pitch deck, whatever you want to call it, your business plan. And that's really about it. So I try to simplify things as much as possible, and I really want to pull out of this group this information so I can provide feedback if you're interested. But this is really what we call like the elevator pitch. You should be able to communicate this in under 2 minutes. So if you're talking to somebody from a bank, it's going to have a slightly different flavor than if you're talking to a prospective partner because you need that certain resource. But the idea is summarize it as concisely as possible. Question?
Yeah, so you mentioned that you look at this and you would assume that there had been a bunch of back research
Yes.
that went into each of these. And we've basically done the research on the demographics, to some degree developing the description of the product. But all of the costs and benefits and really the constraints and cash flow, those things they're not things that we have done research on or really
Yes.
have skill to do. Do you think that that's critical for us for this pitch competition, or is that an expectation that we would have?
I would keep it very high level. Are you familiar with the term swag? It's a sophisticated wild-ass guess. So I joke about it, but we use that term all the time. So for expenses, there's no reason to go into extreme detail. I round to 100,000 or round to 50,000. So is development of this app, development of this product going to be 50,000, or is it going to be 250,000, or is it going to be more? Keep it that high level and don't worry about too many of the details. Carl.
Just so we all know, when you say high level in that context, what do you mean?
So for example, for total investment required. So for my canning company, I can roughly guess it's going to be about 300,000. I don't need to go into this piece of equipment is going to be 105,000. This is going to be 12,000. I just know it's And for some of the bigger projects, it was, was it 100,000, 250,000, 500,000, or $1 million? So it wasn't very sophisticated. So I would say don't worry about it too much, but get something on paper.
And I would also like to remind everyone, this is an educational thing. Like there is money involved, there is a pitch competition, but at the end of the day, this is for you guys, most importantly, to really learn and grow from. So, the fact that you're just doing it will be amazing on a resume. It'll give you exposure to like people like Todd, like the president of Pratt and stuff. And so it's not about you having everything perfect. It's about you just doing what you can do, ballparking it when you need to, and at the end of the day, just showing up for the sessions and showing up for the pitch. That's the most important thing you can do.
That said, we are definitely going to take you through a napkin math session before the end of this, where you can get to your swag without feeling like you're just throwing random stuff at the wall.
Absolutely.
There's also, you're going to be practicing this, right?
We're gonna go through this.
So you're going to be going through this, so if there's any particular box that everybody has questions about or is not sure about, I will be able to find some resources for you to include in the toolkit that I'll send next week with more resources and things like that.
And great question, by the way. Really great.
Yes.
So how should a group like us approach this? Because we are not coming from the perspective of money in the end, and we are developing, when I started this and when my group members join me, we have environment in our minds, not like the money and the
Yes.
cost and benefit. It's secondary, but how should we approach this?
That's a very good point. I would always bring it back to what are you really asking for? So when I show you the first page, the executive summary of my pitch deck or my presentation, it's what are you asking for? So when you ask for, I guess, what do you need for your project to take flight? Do you need funding? Or can you just do it without? Because if you can do it without, then you're not really asking for anything. Then it's just kind of structuring your idea so you can execute the project. But if you're asking for funding, somebody's going to want to know, how am I going to get repaid? Unless it's like a government grant where it's truly like social benefit, or somebody just gives you money. Otherwise, they're going to want to know, how are you going to live? How are you going to pay bills? How are you going to pay salary? How are you going to pay your lease, electricity bill? So this doesn't have to be perfect, and I just have a slant towards getting straight to the financial information, which always takes me back to Shark Tank, where there's like, what's in it for me? Like, what are your real numbers? So when I do an executive summary, it's really just basic, high level. This is a summary of what I'm going to do. I'm going to can beer for local craft breweries and spread the cost of equipment across 25 breweries. I make 25 cents or whatever per can filling. And I expect to do X amount of volume in a month. That's it. So it's not very detailed. So if you're talking about selling a product, it's, do you expect to make $10 per unit, $15 per unit, $100 per unit? And how many of those do you need to sell then to pay for, say, 2 full-time salaries and a building? So it's just kind of starting to think about, like, how do you frame up your idea in terms of feasibility for financing. And I believe the next session is going into a deeper dive in financing. So I don't want to get too detailed in it, but it's something I have to start thinking about.
I just wanted to ask about what if there's also an angle for us to partner with an already existing company? Is that something that we would have to kind of think about in a different?
Yeah, so your project would still have operating costs, and it would just be financing it from a different company. So the other company would then be financing your project. Like what's the specific? Can you tell me the specifics?
Essentially, it's just an additive or addition to a person's social media profile that will allow them to show them how their carbon footprint is being tracked or monitored.
Yeah. So then I think about it in terms of how do you get paid for that? For the good or bad, that's just how I view every scenario now. It's constraints or dependencies. One key one is that somebody's going to want to buy your idea.
Right, we're basically selling an idea.
Yep. So there's going to be zero cash flow until you sell that idea. And it's fine, it's just something to note and something to document. Because now you have to think about, all right, if you have 3 people, I know you're all students right now, but if you were trying to pull salary so you could pay rent, it's going to be hard if you're not going to be able to sell any of it until one big sale at the end. Any other questions? Do you want to try giving this a shot?
Yeah.
And then you can ask questions, I can float around. Does that work? All right. All right. Excellent. So this is what we do first. So it was good. I was impressed with what I saw. I think it's important that you just keep things very high level. You saw how this project in the back for this restaurant was, between 500 and $1 million. Like we're not asking for very detailed information, but what we were able to identify from that is it's going to be about $1 million, and he's not going to see anything for probably about 2 years. So you have to build that into what you end up pitching. You're going to need money to float yourself for a couple of years as you build out that project. Versus something like your project where it's more service-based, like a travel agency, right? Where there's really not that much upfront cost. A couple computers, maybe some software, a small office. Like you're not investing, hundreds of $1,000s into building out an app. So very low on the startup costs. And as soon as you book a deal, you're going to see cash. So you could, in theory, see positive cash flow in a month or 2. So just kind of mapping that out. So after we do something like this, for Accenture, we give the nod to the project managers. Every project has to have one key point person. And then that person is responsible for building out the detail. I'm going to go through a little bit here of what my version of a pitch deck or presentation looks like, and I'm sure we can refine it. Yeah, so I started doing technology implementations, large-scale technology implementations, and then I moved into the strategy group at Accenture. We primarily focused on helping companies pitch either big cost-saving projects or big revenue-driving projects. With that said, this is pretty standard business plan, if you will. The industry is used to seeing presentations, so PowerPoint is primarily the software used for these presentations. I know there's a lot of cool presentation software that you can use to create this, but I would recommend starting in PowerPoint and just building out your slides. So executive summary is probably one of the most important slides. A lot of times in conversations, even for my conversation with the bank, I don't think we got past the executive summary slide. They asked me questions and I was able to flip to them, like, who are your competitors? Well, I have a competitor landscape mapped out, but it was really hung up on that executive summary slide. Business summary, that's just going into more detail, just the next level down. You just kind of keep clicking down, right? Owner bio, that was specific in my scenario because I'm selling them on who I am, my background, because they have to give me a pretty big check. Timeline key milestones, just map out, what are the big things. If you're building a brick and mortar, right, so your big milestones are going to be identifying a site securing funding, identifying a site location, designing it, building it. It's going to be pretty linear. For something more service-based, it's, there's not going to be as many big, building block type milestones, but it's going to be just getting off the ground, purchasing all your computer equipment, finding office space, whatever the case is, so you can turn the lights on. Direction and vision, it's a lot of fluff in these sections usually. Still put it in there. How does your company differentiate itself from your competitors, right? So mine was, making sure I focus, making sure my direction is, a one-stop shop for these breweries. They don't have to order through someone else. I just show up with what we need. I only charge them for what we use. That was my direction there. Capability summary. A lot of the projects I worked on was solely a capability summary. So what that is so if you're trying to build out a piece of software, what are the 5 or 6 capabilities that software is going to allow you to do? Now you compare it to your competitors, and how do you rank? So you rank it 1 through 5 in international finance, right? the ease in which you can transfer money to a foreign country is a capability. Now, if you are behind the times and it's a clunky process, we might rank it at number 2, where a competitor like Western Union might have a very smooth process, and that specific capability is ranked really high. So just identifying what are your capabilities and how do they score next to your peers. I mean, I've got a lot of these slides. I don't plan on talking through them unless people have specific questions. But this is just some of the stuff. I know there's a lot of like business plan software out there as well. One of the breweries I'm working with is building out a big couple $1 million brewery, and he used software, and it's just, I don't know if anyone's done their own taxes, but it was like TurboTax. It just prompts you for questions, and then it builds your own plan in Microsoft Word. So if you use something like that, I would still take the key information and put it into a presentation, right? Because at the end of the day, for my loan, I was sitting at a bank with 3 people, and I was just really just talking to them, walking them through my numbers, through my idea. But if I would have had a Word document, we wouldn't have had the same feel. So, competitor landscape, sales and marketing plan, management plan, risks. Anything else that you need specific to yours, you can add. Anything that's too detailed, you should always keep this to about 15, 20 slides max. Anything else, put it in the appendix. Another thing I do for these is, as you keep adding stuff, you can make one master document, and then you really need to know your audience. So if you're coming to me with an idea, I'm going to want to see something like that project intake form, because that's what I want to see. But if you go to, say, like a director in IT, because you want help building out an application, you might only show the executive summary, and then maybe 2 slides on technology requirements and basic look and feel of what you want. So that way you can have this very select conversation with that stakeholder. So that technology person wouldn't care about your sales and marketing plan and all that. So I use like one document, and then based on the conversation, I just pull out different slides. So let's just start with the executive summary. So there's really 3, in my mind, there's 3 key pieces. Whatever your summary is, I want to be able to completely understand what it is you're trying to do. If you're trying to link up customers who are looking for a more unique travel experience, say that. And whatever else you need to say, but keep that 3 to 5 bullets max. And then a financial summary. This can remain high level, but I'm going to want to see, or any investor is going to want to see, what do you think you're going to sell? How much do you think it's going to cost? And what's your total cash flow going to look like? Right? Because what happened in one example, I knew this guy who was working on, it was like a lotion, it was like a hair product, and it was great. It got really good reviews, got good feedback, it was selling really well. But what happened is he sold into, it was like Walmart or Target or one of those big brick and mortar stores, and he didn't see cash flow for 1.5 years because they have that type of purchasing power where they're not going to pay you until it's 100% gone. Well, although it was still a good product, his cash flow is 0.0000 until year 3, and he went out of business, even though he had the very good product. So it's important to be honest with yourself of when you're actually going to see that. But it's still pretty high level. And then always keep it down to one current request. In my case, for my conversation with the bank, it's a loan request, right? Or if you're going to a technology person or a technology director, your request might be to help get on board and build this app. But make sure you're very, very clear on what it is you're asking to that specific audience. So for this final pitch presentation, so what are you asking from the group? Are you asking for seed funding of 10 grand to start a pilot? Are you asking for more? In your case, are you asking for $1 million, and this is just a forum to refine your idea? You just be clear with what it is you're asking for.
It says they're funding provided by owner. That's their $50,000.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Is that an actual $50,000, or is that $50,000 worth of time that you're putting in?
This was actual $50,000.
So this is not including you actually working. Right?
Correct.
Oh, wow.
It's like if you buy a house, you have to put at least 10%. I don't know what the percentage now, but you have to put 10% down. Same with my loan. In my case, I was actually able to just more or less not co-sign, but I was able to show like a 401k wasn't 50 grand, but between that and if you need a parent or something to sign, it's just like getting a mortgage. They just want to, really, it comes down to you have to have skin in the game, because nobody wants to give you money if you're not invested to see this project through. So that's why they come up with, all right, you come up with a big chunk of money or some other way to guarantee that you're not just going to walk away from this after you lose interest in 6 months. And that was really it. We stayed on this slide. They were familiar enough with the industry that they were able to just ask questions. But then the look and feel, it's like I try to keep ththings fairly visual, but it's market opportunity, products and services, where I want to put it.
Pitch competition, Todd.
Yep.
How many slides should I have?
I'd probably keep it to three to five.
Slides.
Yeah.
3 to 5 slides. Okay.
Because this slide's probably going to take 3 minutes. Yeah, you need to learn the mechanics, right? Because it's probably not going to be, in all reality, it's probably not going to be this idea. It's going to be your next idea or your next idea.
But this is something, no matter what happens, you can always have on your resume, you can always talk about in interviews, and you can learn from, and then to make you that much better and stronger. So it's super important that you do it.
So can we safely say you'll help, because you said in number 5, you're going to go through more precisely of what the judges, if you will.
March 31st session 5.
So. I just want to give you a look and feel of what I consider industry standard for these types of things. Startup costs, just mapping it out over time, right? These were my key startup costs, equipment, truck, and when I was going to actually purchase it, because someone has to wire those funds. Just mapping it out. My bio, everyone's seen something like that. Timeline for key milestones. Just so we know what are the key things you have to work on and when is it going to be started, when are you going to start it, and when are you going to finish it. Direction and vision, a lot of fluff in there. That would be probably my first to pull if you didn't want to create a slide. Capability summary, though, very important. Really size yourself up against your competitors. Make sure there's not already recycling programs that are, doing something like this. Because if there are, maybe it makes sense for you to reach out to them and try to, join efforts, something like that. Industry outlook, make sure once you identify your personas, what are your main persona, how many are there? How many of those people are actually going to buy your product or service? And in which geography? So this for the canning business, this is the number of breweries per person or per 1,000 people, right? So at the time I was starting my business, it was 1.3 for New York City. Where you go to a more established craft beer market like Colorado or Washington, and it was 6.1 breweries per 1,000 people. So my argument was the market for craft breweries in New York back in 2015 was significantly under that of more established markets. So that was it. It was just a point to the bankers where they're like, oh, this market's going to continue to grow. I get it. And there really weren't any questions.
What would you call this type of analysis when you're saying, if you were to go home and say, I want to look this up online and figure out how I do this, what would you call this?
This specific type?
Yeah, this specific type of analysis.
I don't know, are you looking for a specific term? Do you know, or?
I was going to say this looks very much like a bottoms-up analysis to me, like a bottoms-up market analysis where you're looking at the overall businesses within the space, how much revenue they're doing, so then you can point to the overall growth. So if someone were to go home and try to figure out how to do this, they might want to look at bottoms-up analysis.
Perfect.
Sweet. You got the jargon.
This is just a map, try to make it visual of the breweries. So at this time, there weren't that many breweries. If I did this map now, it would look significantly different. Competitor analysis, at the time, these were the only mobile canners. There was one in our area. Now there's like 5 or 6. So.
Didn't you figure out who that person was, take them out for a beer, talk to them, and then figure out that they don't know what they're doing?
So there's one. There's Ironheart. They got bought out by private equity investors, and they're up to like 35 separate canning lines now. So they run 35 separate trucks. But yeah, to Carl's point, yeah, I met someone else who was starting a mobile canning company, and we we tried to, form a partnership, similar to my example with you. If you know somebody that's already doing something, try to talk to them and see if you can just join efforts. It ended up not working. It just made more sense for us to follow more of like a contractor model where we both own our own businesses because we both own our own canning line. So it just didn't quite make sense, but we talked about it.
What's yours called?
I'm Anvil Craft Services.
Oh, okay,
Yep.
sorry.
Sales and marketing, I didn't really get into that too much. Management plan, who's on my team, risk and mitigation. For me, it was changing canning technology. I'm investing a lot of money in equipment. It's very possible they could come out with something cooler, like a new iPhone. And now I'm own a $200,000 iPhone 4. So that's a big risk, right? That's it. It's just showing that I've done my due diligence. And at the end of the day, I throw all financial information in the appendix. We never even got into that level of detail ever in our conversation. It all started and ended up in the executive summary. Yes.
So how was the real implementation different from what you initially thought? Where did the difference occur, and how
close was I to my original plan?
Yeah, and how did you manage to?
So my original plan, I went with a new piece of canning technology, and it ended up not performing as they advertised. So long story short, I had to get a lawyer involved and claw back my money, which I got most of it, not all of it. And I put money down on another piece of equipment, which put me back like 6 months. Wow. So I carried, my lease, my truck payment, insurance, all that for almost an extra year while I waited for my canning line. So it was definitely not at all what I thought it was going to look like. But now I'm where I thought I should be. So it was just delayed a year.
So what did you do during that extra year?
It's kind of a gray area, but I still had my job at Accenture. So
you had a backup.
I had a backup plan.
You didn't get out.
So I took a leave of absence. So I was able to go back. So I didn't cut off my tie with my job. I just took a leave of absence. They encourage this type of stuff. So that I got pretty lucky there.
How big was your group? Were you alone in this, or do you have people you work with in terms of finances or technology or whatever? For what, developing the plan or developing or running the business, or? Yeah, I mean in general, like the abilities that you lacked. How did you connect with people?
So I did everything myself. I financed it myself. I found the bank. No partners. And I just asked colleagues for advice. And I went and I just chatted with a bunch of breweries. I make sure that they were on board beforehand. So in my experience, a business-to-business model is a lot easier than a business-to-consumer model. So for your shin pads, for example, it's going to be 100 times easier lining up 2 or 3 customers that are going to buy 10,000 units versus trying to sell 100,000 of them to a consumer. So I only have 25 potential customers. So when I talk about sales and marketing, I don't even have a website. Because I'm at capacity, there's really no reason for it, but it's like I know who I have to go after. So finding the business. So if you have your idea and you pitch it to someone like Facebook or something that they can add on, you know who you have to target. James.
So does that mean that if I'm trying to figure out a channel strategy, I should only focus on the largest people? Or does that mean that I should kind of diversify my outreach?
I would say a little bit of both. So similar to Mike's presentation, I would find that biggest persona group, because that's going to be your cash cow. That's where you're going to make a lot of your money, but it may not be the most exciting. It may not actually be what you want to do. So that's when you diversify and get into a little bit of everything. So that's why I'm starting to diversify from beer into wine, into cider, into coffee. Yes.
I don't know if you knew, but the name of your company was used in Marvel's Punisher as a military company.
Anvil Craft Service, or just Anvil?
No, Anvil, just
All right.
Anvil.
Anvil itself is used in like
Yeah.
thousands, but yeah.
Thought, like, I saw it somewhere, but
I don't associate with the military.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Don't worry.
What's the next one?
I actually decided my name and logo over a beer at a brewery, and the joy of being business to business is it doesn't really. I could change my name tomorrow, and it doesn't really matter, because it's like I don't rely on. I don't really rely on that part of my brand. It's just that I show up on time. That
The other
I
thing
produce
that
good product.
I've noticed is it seems like a lot of it is you're selling yourself
Right.
too.
Right.
Like you're going and it's something that I've learned. Have you guys ever heard of this where sometimes the people that are most successful are people that know that are able to think about what's in it for the person I'm talking to and are able to just like have a heart-to-heart kind of communication and come off with authenticity. And I think you're actually a really great role model for that. You're very authentic.
Yeah, not trying to sell, right?
Yeah, like I don't get any kind of salesman vibe from you. I get like this is
Probably
guy,
a good thing.
This is a guy who just wants to provide a good service.
Yeah.
Like
Who
you
knows
take
his
it or you
stuff.
leave it. There's not a neediness.
Yeah.
There's not a pitchiness, a fakeness to you.
Yeah, it's good.
When you do that, you say you don't have partners, and how do you hold yourself accountable during this process? I ask this because sometimes I tend to, like if I think about all the process by myself, I stuck in my own head,
Yep.
right? And how do you have a mentor, you have a coach, or what do you do?
So you don't kind of go down a rabbit hole in one specific topic, or just making sure that you get everything done? Or what's the,
I mean, when you do this, you say you don't have other partners.
no.
Yeah, I mean, how you hold yourself accountable.
It's a very good question. I really wanted to get out of my job at Accenture. So it was, I was driven by, I need to get this done, because I was having a child. And I thought starting a business would give me a lot of flexibility. Well, in hindsight, no, I work every minute of the day. So, but that was what kind of held my feet to the fire of just,
So you made it must, right?
yeah, it was a must. It had to get done.
And so how do you also have other source you can get different perspective or feedback? You have mentors or you have
Yeah, I've had a lot of mentors. My wife's uncle was really pushing me to start this. He actually passed away, which ironically, the one thing he said that you regret is not trying something. So that's really what pushed me, because I had a pretty good job and it was a reliable paycheck, and I was giving that up right as I was having a kid. So he pushed me. So yeah, surround yourself by mentors, and if you don't have a specific skill set, just find that person. It's more about finding, and I've talked to Carl about this, it's more about finding the right resources than trying to do it yourself. So if you don't know the finance part, you can find somebody that can help. Looks like I'm out of time, so
Todd, that was amazing.
yeah, I hope you found it valuable.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.